It was April 1943, and the war felt very far from the quiet woodland of Hagley, in the English countryside near Birmingham. For local boys had slipped into the private estate to poach birds' nests, the kind of small mischief that filled long wartime afternoons. Deep among the trees they found an old wych elm, its trunk gnarled and hollow, and one of the boys climbed up to peer inside. What he saw there froze him where he stood. Looking back up at him, from deep within the tree, was a human skull. At first the boys thought it might be an animal skull, but the tufts of hair and the remnant of decayed flesh told them otherwise. Terrified of being caught trespassing, they swore each other to silence and went home. But the image would not leave the youngest of them. Days later, unable to keep the secret, he told his parents what they had found. Word reached the police, and officers made their way into Hagley Wood to examine the strange hollow tree and whatever it was still holding inside. Inside the trunk, investigators found the near-complete skeleton of a woman, crammed into a space so tight she could only have been forced in headfirst, most likely soon after death, before rigor mortis set in. Scattered nearby lay a cheap gold wedding ring, fragments of clothing, and a shoe. Most disturbing of all, a piece of taffeta fabric had been pushed deep into her mouth. To the forensic pathologist, that detail suggested one grim conclusion. This woman had not died naturally. She had been suffocated. The examination was led by Professor James Webster, a respected forensic scientist. He estimated the woman had been dead for around 18 months, placing her death in the autumn of 1941, during the height of the Blitz. She had been roughly 35, stood about 5 feet tall, had irregular teeth, and had given birth at least once. From these details he built a portrait of a real person, a woman with a life and a history. Yet a name, the one thing that mattered most, remained completely beyond reach. Police threw themselves at the case. They checked dental records across the region, cross-referenced missing persons reports, and traced every scrap of her clothing to laundries and shops. Nothing matched. Thousands of women went missing in the chaos of the war, but none of them seemed to be her. It was as though she had simply appeared in that tree from nowhere, a woman erased from every record that should have held her. The investigation slowed, then stalled, and Hagley Wood settled back into its uneasy quiet. Then, months later, the mystery took a turn no one expected. Graffiti began appearing on walls and monuments across the area, written in confident white chalk. The first read simply, "Who put Bella down the wych elm?" More followed, each naming the dead woman as Bella. The messages implied the writer knew something the police did not, that this nameless victim had a name after all. Detectives searched for whoever was leaving them, hoping to find a witness or a killer. They never identified the author. The name gave the mystery its haunting identity, but it solved nothing. Who was Bella, and how did the graffiti writer know to call her that? Some believed the writer was involved in her death, taunting the authorities. Others thought it was someone burdened by guilty knowledge, unable to speak openly. A few dismissed it as a local prank feeding on morbid gossip. Whatever the truth, the name stuck, and the woman in the tree became forever known simply as Bella. One theory reached into the shadow world of wartime espionage. During the war, this stretch of the Midlands was ringed by munitions factories, prime targets for enemy intelligence. Years later, a woman came forward claiming her relative had been part of a Nazi spy ring, and that a foreign agent, possibly a cabaret performer, had been killed and hidden to keep her from talking. British intelligence had indeed captured German spies nearby. Could Bella have been one of them, silenced and stuffed into a tree? A stranger theory pointed toward the occult. The renowned anthropologist Margaret Murray, who studied witchcraft, suggested the death carried the marks of ritual. In old folklore, a severed hand, the so-called hand of glory, held dark power, and confining a body in a tree was said to trap its spirit. This mattered because Bella's skeleton was missing one detail that fueled the whispers. A hand bone had been found buried separately, scattered a short distance from the tree, as if deliberately removed. The severed hand detail electrified those who believed in a witchcraft killing, and it wasn't the only unsettling coincidence. A few years earlier, a man had been found dead nearby under strange circumstances, some linked to ritual practice. Local rumors spoke of covens meeting in the surrounding hills. Yet skeptics argued the scattered bones were simply the work of animals disturbing a shallow grave, and that folklore had been stitched onto an ordinary, brutal murder. Both sides had arguments. Neither had proof. As the decades passed, hope of solving the case slipped further away. Then came a final, maddening blow. Sometime after the investigation, the skeleton itself vanished from the records. The remains that might one day have yielded DNA, isotope analysis, or a facial reconstruction were lost, misplaced somewhere in the machinery of wartime bureaucracy. Without the bones, modern science could not step in to finish what 1943 could not. The one piece of physical evidence that truly mattered had disappeared as completely as Bella's name. Today, more than 80 years later, the questions remain exactly as they were. Who was the woman in the Wych Elm? Was she a silenced spy, the victim of a ritual killing, or an ordinary woman murdered and hidden in the dark? And who kept chalking her name onto walls, insisting they knew? The tree is long gone, but the graffiti has resurfaced across the years, the same haunting words returning again and again. Who put Bella in the Wych Elm? Nobody, it seems, has ever dared to answer.